Whenever anyone asks me why I am part of the women's liberation movement, I always reply, because I am a woman. What they've said to me is that since I am a black person, black oppression is the only oppression with which they expect me to concern myself. But for me not to participate in the women's liberation movement would be to deny my womanhood.
Rosemary Brown was born in Jamaica into a family of strong, educated women. She came to Canada in 1951 to attend university. As a student at McGill and later the University of British Columbia, Rosemary faced pervasive discrimination. It was through adversity that she found her purpose as a leader against racism and sexism.
Indeed, I'm twice blessed. I am black and I'm a woman. And to be black and female in a society which is both racist and sexist is to be in the unique position of having nowhere to go but up.
By the mid-1960s, Rosemary was married, had 3 children and 3 university degrees, including a master's in social work. She was a member of the BC Association for the Advancement of Colored People and appeared regularly as a panelist on the nationally syndicated series People in Conflict.
Unless the women's liberation movement supports the struggles of the poor, of the oppressed races, of the old and other disadvantaged groups in society, it will never achieve its goals. Not to do so would be to isolate itself from the masses of women that make up a large segment of all these groups.
In 1972, she made history by becoming the first black woman elected to a Canadian legislature. She made history again in 1975 when she became the first black woman to run for leadership of a federal political party. Rosemary Brown served as the member of the Legislative Assembly for Vancouver-Burrard until 1986. During her 14-year career in provincial politics, she pushed for legislation to prohibit gender-based discrimination and worked toward improving services for immigrants, people with disabilities, the elderly, and other marginalized groups. Rosemary's years in office showed women from all backgrounds that they could make a difference. In the following years, more women held positions on boards and commissions across British Columbia.
This country, Canada, is beautiful and strong only because of the people of both sexes and of all races. And its strength and its beauty will increase only to the extent that it is able to accept and respect all of its people equally.
Hello everyone, my name is Curvis Rose. I'm 20 years old. I am a Haitian-born Canadian. I moved to Canada when I was about 8 years old, and to be very honest with you, I've never experienced race or racism when I was in Haiti until I moved to Canada. So growing up in Canada was very, very different. Coming from Haiti, everyone around you was black, so you've never really felt out of place. But my first experience with racism here in Canada was, when I was in grade 4, and I loved the movie I love Jackie Chan as an actor, and I just love karate and everything. So the kids would call me Blackie Chan, which, like, to be very honest with you, I never really understood, the joke. So like, I'd play around with them, I'd laugh with them, stuff like that. They'd be like, yeah, Blackie Chan, that's cool, that's super awesome. But it's not until like my university days or even my high school days, my later moments in life, that I realized, hey, like that was racist, But it's been a passion of mine ever since I was very, very young to create a platform that can help at-risk children, at-risk communities, and just ensure that there's a better future, a more sustainable future for all of us, and everyone has a chance at getting exactly what they want out of life. So that's one of my aspirations, and it's something that I'm currently building here in Ottawa. My team and I, we've hosted an event called the Aftermath Exhibition. We help youth, young artists, young Black artists, particular in the community. We facilitate growth, we help them grow their artistry, we help them showcase their artistry, and we help them connect with other artists around the city. And also, this particular event allows us to create a new narrative for Black people within the community. The question of why is Black History Month important is a question that I kind of struggled with answering because, to be very honest with you, I don't know too much about Canadian history, well, Canadian Black history. I didn't know too much until I did a little bit of research myself, but I feel as though there's not as much emphasis on Canadian Black history. So I think it's a month that we should take to raise our voices, to highlight current issues that we're dealing with. So it's about our current struggles, our past, our history, where we came from, as well as where we're going. How to fix that issue of systemic racism is a little bit more representation of Black people within the media, switching up the narratives that have been ascribed to Black people. So whether it be the narratives of Black men being super violent and being a gangster, and Black women being hypersexualized in the media. So I think it's essential to switch up those narratives and showing the diversity within Black culture. Contrary to popular belief, slavery is a very real part of Canada's history. It was officially legalized in 1689, but it existed way before that. Settlers first enslaved Indigenous peoples, but killed them with their infectious diseases. Settlers were then forced to enslave Black men and Black women from the Americas and the Caribbean. Colonists really hoped to establish plantations here in Canada, but the weather was too cold, so there was no plantations happening here. As a result, the economy was less reliant on slave labor. But to quote Dr. Thornhill, a notable Canadian lawyer, Blacks as chattel property or movables became as a commonplace as were the abundant public advertisements, posters, and notices of which they were the subjects. So, yes, there were slaves auctions here in Canada, frequently, especially frequent in Nova Scotia. Yes, there were published notices offering rewards for runaway slaves here in Canada. Yes, newspapers regularly advertised the sale of slaves. Yes, and yes, the settlements of Quebec City, Montreal, Halifax frequently received ships containing enslaved Black men and women. It is important to note that during the height of slavery in Canada, not all Black people were enslaved. But nonetheless, as noted by author Robin Maynard, slavery was a very real institution in Canada that totally devalued Black life, making way for institutionalized racism still present in our system today. For more information, read the resources found below in the description.
My name is Skyler. I'm 23. I've actually done 3 different programs at Carleton University, and I haven't finished any one of the degrees yet. But I'm just working right now, which is, I think, a good little hustle to get me back towards my school stuff. I play a lot of sports. I played football, I ran track and field, I played rugby, done a bunch of different things provincially. I won championships, which is cool too. But I also tore my ACL a couple months ago. So I don't know if I'm gonna do that anymore here. But also I'm here to talk about my experience and my skin color today. And obviously I think that before that, it's important just to check my privilege, because as a man, I know that my experience is different than the experience of women of color have. And also on top of that, I think that me being biracial, that also gives me a different experience than a lot of people. And the third thing I think that kind of makes my experience different than others is just my socioeconomic status. Because I know that me and my family were kind of like upper middle class, which also affects how I think I'm perceived and how I take in the world. I have had experiences, a lot of experiences dealing with racism nonetheless. A lot in sports, but I don't think I'm gonna talk about sports today. The first thing that came to mind when someone mentioned racism was once in high school, I went to Colonel By secondary school in the East End, and I was walking up Montreal Road towards a highway overpass. And as I was there, I was just listening to my music, and I remember a cop drove by. There were two cops in the car, and a bit of an awkward experience, but like we made eye contact, and both of them were just staring at me as they drove by. And I remember I almost stopped just to be like, what the heck was that? So I literally looked back at the car as it drove by, and like it almost seemed like surreal, like something on a movie, like why are they both staring at me? But I ended up walking to the bus shelter, which was actually on an off-ramp from the highway on Montreal. And I was sitting down for, it felt like 30 seconds, and all of a sudden, the cops had turned around and they literally drove up onto like the platform where the bus was and cornered me inside the bus shelter. And honestly, like I was so shocked that like I didn't even do anything. Like I had zero reaction. And it kind of blew my mind because I'm thinking like I was already kind of scared and skittish at the time. I can only imagine somebody who wasn't as calm or had had a bad experience with cops, like what could have happened. Fortunately, like I just stayed still and like they didn't do anything. They just got out of the car and talked to me. But what happened was they were looking for someone who was similar to my description, they said. The unfortunate part of it was that the next day I was telling one of my friends about it at school, and it turns out that she was the one who had reported to the police, and she told me about the guy, and she showed me a picture, and I looked nothing like him. So in hindsight, it was just a little bit scary because like anything can happen. Like there's so many variables at play, and like it kind of blew my mind that I honestly looked nothing like this guy, but they still pulled up on me like that. And it even just jumping the curb to corner me in a bus shelter, like to this day, thinking back, it kind of gives me just a really odd feeling inside, kind of in my stomach. But apart from that, I think the only other thing I would mention is being biracial. It's interesting because my mother being Black and my father being white, I actually mostly just get a lot of bigots more coming forward when I'm with my dad. I think it's something about people seeing me, a colored person, with my father who's white. I know he gets a lot of comments and a lot of people in his face sometimes. I think it happens a lot less now. Hopefully that's people changing, but overall, like I don't think any of us are exempt from those types of experience, and I hope that nobody has to experience it if there's a way to avoid it. So for my moment of Black Canadian history, I'm going to be talking about Harry Winston Jerome. Born in 1940 in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Harry Jerome was recognized as the nation's premier sprinter in the 60s. At the young age of 18, he broke a 31-year-old Canadian record in the 220-yard dash. The following year, he made headlines again, becoming the first native Canadian to hold a world record in the 100-yard and 100-meter dash with a time of 9.2 and 10 seconds respectively. He went on to represent Canada at the Olympics in 1960, 1964, and 1968. After his retirement in 1969, he was invited by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau to form the new Ministry of Sport. He went on to hold a number of senior positions. Not only was he a fantastic athlete, he was also serious about his studies. eventually earning a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master of Science degree in physical education at the University of Oregon. In a time where Black people were systematically discriminated against and dehumanized in Canadian sport, it's remarkable to see how time and time again, Black athletes like Jerome shut bigots down effortlessly. For more information, check out the links in the description below.
Hi, my name is Maritza. I am a beauty and lifestyle blogger on Instagram, as well as a law student and aspiring lawyer. My journey online with blogging started with hair care when I started my natural hair journey, and initially I just wanted to share different tips for women of color and Black women since we didn't always have representation and we didn't always have those tips and those resources to take care of our hair. And this is how it started, and through that I developed a passion for hair, a passion for beauty, but I also wanted to be that representation. I wanted to create a community and be a part of a community with Black women and women of color online. As for my passion for the law and the academic side, I am really lucky in that it permits me to put into action concretely my activism. I'm an intersectional feminist. I have a very big passion for social justice. And through my academic career and through my professional career, it permits me to put that into action. So those are kind of my two passions that I developed throughout the years. I have had a very unique experience of Blackness and circulating through spaces throughout my life. So because, of course, of my racial ethnicity and where I was born. So I was born in Haiti, and I grew up there until I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I moved to Canada. I am also of a mixed heritage, so I am mostly of Black and Arab heritage. So I have had a very, let's say, privileged experience of Blackness. So I wouldn't say that I experienced overt discrimination of racism throughout my life, so I'm very lucky to say that, but I'm still very aware of the privilege that I have to have been able to navigate through life this way. However, the times that I had experienced discrimination or racism throughout my life, I think it's sort of just opened my eyes to the amount of work that still needs to be done of the systemic racism that is present. And although it hasn't been really pleasant experiences, I think it only motivated me even more and kind of fueled my ambition to find different ways to change that situation, to fuel my activism and find different ways to change that, or at least to make my mark, to change the situation, whether it be through volunteering or whether it be through my work online or whether it be through my profession. When we think of Black history, we tend to think of the United States, the Civil Rights Movement, the movement of enslaved Blacks to South America, the Caribbean, the United States. But rarely do we think of Canada, specifically Canada's role as a safe haven and an ideal place for fugitive slaves to escape slavery and slave ownership. Well, that was the case specifically for the city of Oakville. So Oakville was actually considered a safe haven and a place where a Black community, a Black Canadian community settled and developed throughout the years. I found out about the city of Oakville and its importance as a safe haven towards the end of high school when I read the book Any Known Blood by Lawrence Hill, a biracial Canadian author, and he also wrote the book of Negroes. And his father is also a very prominent figure in the Black community in Canada, specifically in the city of Oakville. And Oakville had a very important role as a safe haven through the Underground Railroad, so it was one of the places that a lot of fugitive slaves chose to settle in order to escape. So the Underground Railroad were a series of networks and safe havens that were created by slave abolitionists and that were utilized by fugitive slaves in order to escape slave ownership, or specifically states in which slave ownership remained, specifically southern states. And they used those networks and those routes in order to get to the north. So the Underground Railroad technically started in the 1780s. However, it reached its peak in the 1850s when the United States passed the Fugitive Slaves Act. This act permitted slave catchers to follow fugitive slaves all the way to the north, although they would try to escape. So operators of the Underground Railway created a series of codes and a series of routes, and they would help fugitive slaves get from safe space to another without being discovered. Now they use a series of codes in order to maintain the secrecy of the networks as well as the locations themselves. Now there was a peak in fugitive slaves in Canada, as slaves at that time knew that they would be safe from capture once they would get on Canadian soil. So although Oakville was not technically a station or a safe haven established in the network itself, a lot of fugitive slaves found their way to Oakville due to its proximity to Toronto and other safe spaces. They were helped by many men in the community, such as Captain Robert Wilson, who stowed slaves in their grain hold, leaving from ports in Rochester in the United States all the way to Canada. And this is where a lot of Black men and women from the United States established a community permanently in Oakville. So for example, John Costley was the publisher and the editor of the newspaper The Bee, and the African Methodist Church was created by William Butler. So two prominent figures in Oakville who created and established a community and different organizations for the Canadian Black community in Oakville. So for more information, please click on the links in the description.
Hello, my name is David Gakure. I'm originally from Rwanda, and I was born and raised in Montreal, and I've been in Ottawa for the past 10 years. My areas of interest are those of diversity and inclusion. I had a chance to become more aware and work more in those realms. But most explicitly, it's the matters when it's rooted in respect, in full acceptance, but also working directly and every day towards removing or reducing any barriers for full inclusions and full participation in society. I've had a chance to be in Ottawa, or the National Capital Region, for 10 or so years, and I've been blessed in having a mainly positive experience. But far too often, there is lots of times where some spaces I haven't been allowed to be part of. I've had a tough time having access to them, or worse, when I have finally accessing places that I'm entitled to, I was not feeling welcome. There's sometimes not anything worse than your presence or your being not being accepted when you're supposed to be somewhere. It's part of those reasons why I think events and moments like Black History Month are important, because we're intentionally taking the time to remember the many things that we're celebrating from the countries of Black folks in Canada and what we do. It's part of my resolution this year to continue to be more intentional and more intentional in the two areas that I like, which are diversity and inclusion, working towards that, but also giving myself the homework to do a lot of learning towards that, unlearning towards that, and hopefully helping others and myself be more comfortable in it and encouraging others. Lastly, I think Black History Month is not only celebrated to remember what is past, what is the future, as well as the many things we're doing in the community, but it's also an invitation to others to take part, to strongly support. There's many things to celebrate, but also not just being, we often hear the words of allyship and being an ally, which should not just be a one-day badge of honor, but it's something that we should do every day and should be continued. So I strongly encourage folks to take part, celebrate with us, remember with us, listen to our stories, come to our communities, but also be with us not only in good times, but also when it's tougher times and as we stand together. Today I'll be talking about Viola Desmond. Viola was, Mrs. Desmond rather, was an important figure in Canada, but also in Nova Scotia. Great influence, thriving entrepreneur, businesswoman, and mentor to a lot of people. We have a few things in common, really minimal. Large family, 10 siblings. I had 5 siblings. Also, she studied in Montreal, which at the time was one of the only institution that she could go and was accepting Black applicants. We've heard of Viola Desmond in many different ways. We see her in our $10 bill. We also have a chance to see her in the Heritage Minutes and Moments, which are really important to remember. At that time in 1946, when she was escorted out and faced violence for just being herself and wishing to just enjoy a normal experience and activity and just live and be herself in the movie theaters. That point was important for many, many reasons. One of them was that while she was a thriving entrepreneur and well within her means, she was willing and able to pay for the fees. But the patrons were not accepting her for being herself and sitting with whites, but rather go into the non-white section, segregated sections upstairs. Violently was she pushed away, but she also even more faced violence by the justice system. When she was faced and appeared in court, not only was she not allowed and not given rights to be represented, but also they were not alluding to race as a central motive to it. Instead, they went for tax avoidance and the fact that she was defrauding the government, which was not the case. The violence in there is that not only are we putting aside her identity, putting aside what happened, but also we're looking at freedom of businesses and commerce, superseding individual freedoms of rights and discrimination and not being allowed to be discriminated against. This caused a lot of turmoil, obviously, but this also is only one part of who Viola Desmond was. Before that incident, she was not only a great mentor and a great thriving entrepreneur and woman in the community, but she was giving opportunities, encouraging others and lifting others to get them and give them a fighting chance to be themselves, but also to be also a force in Nova Scotia and in Black Canada. People were coming from all over, not only Nova Scotia, from Montreal and sometimes as far west as can be. But also she was creating that bond, that community in beauty parlors and beauty salons where a certain bond can be exchanged and it will be a safe and positive space for all to be themselves. But afterwards, after the incidents, she also galvanized communities and people stood with her and tried to fight with her all the way through the justice system, which consequently and over again rejected her case. She faced a lot of violence, obviously, and that was a definite turning point. And we can only imagine what she lived afterwards. She even closed her business and relocated outside of Nova Scotia to Montreal and then later in New York. As things are changing and moving forward, she was finally received a free pardon from the Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. Finally righting a wrong that was long overdue. What really encourages me and what I really like about that part of her life, not only at the beginning, but also at the end, is what she did with the communities around her. Not only did she trailblaze and lifted and created paths for others, she picked people up and brought them along for her own life and lifted them and giving opportunities that were never given to others before. But her life also spoke volume and added and helped people to not only see injustice for what it is, see social injustice for what he was, as pernicious as he was in Canada, but also stand for something, stand alongside her for social justice. We see her again every day. We recognize her in 2019 as the Government of Canada as a Historic Person of the Year. We see her in our $10 bill. We see her in Historic of Canada. But for me personally, and I can only speak for myself, it's an important lesson that never taking anything for granted, and that also a lot of work has been done, but we should continue to fight to have our places and our spaces that are rightfully ours, where we can be fully accepted and be fully ourselves. For more information, follow the links below.